The woman was found at dawn, barefoot, walking along the eastern fence of the Briar Ridge apple orchard. It had rained the night before. Her dress, pale blue, dated, the kind you'd find in a church charity box, was soaked from the hem up. Her hair was pinned, her posture upright, and her hands were cupped as if she'd been carrying something invisible. The orchard owner, James Cullman, spotted her from his porch and assumed she was confused or injured. He called out twice before she turned. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, no tremble. She said she was trying to find the house again. When asked what house, she gestured behind her, toward an empty hill, dense with birch and dead pine. Cullman walked her up to his porch and offered her a jacket. She refused it. Her skin was pink from the cold, but she didn't seem to notice. Deputies arrived 20 minutes later. The woman gave her name, Katherine Myerson. She was polite, cooperative, and asked if they could call the family she worked for. "The Thompsons," she said. "They'll be wondering where I went." One of the officers, scanning through his onboard system, froze when he saw the name. Katherine Myerson had been reported missing in 2007. She was 24 when she disappeared. At the time, she'd accepted a nannying job for a family who never returned her calls. Her last known location was a rural county line 3 hours away. Land records listed nothing there but seasonal hunting cabins and decommissioned Forest Service roads. She had vanished without a trace. No bank activity, no sightings. Not a single confirmed lead in 9 years. Now she was 33, standing in the fading gray light of early morning, wearing a dress no one recognized, and telling the officers that she'd only stepped out for a moment. When asked how long she'd been with the children, she smiled gently and said, "They're still little. They don't age when I'm with them." Katherine Myerson wasn't the type to disappear. That's what everyone said afterward. She was punctual, meticulous, overly cautious. She folded receipts into thirds, wrote grocery lists in blue ink, and rewrote them in black. She double-checked locks, carried pepper spray even in daylight. She'd studied early childhood development at Whitman College and moved back home to Boise after graduation to help care for her ailing mother. When their mother passed in 2006, Katherine stayed close to her younger sister, Lauren. She worked irregular jobs, preschool assistant, reading tutor, occasional babysitter, and spent most weekends at Lauren's apartment, watching crime documentaries or walking the Ridge Trail. She rarely drank. She didn't date. If Katherine had secrets, they were quiet ones. The nannying job came from a classified ad posted to a local forum that has since been taken offline. The listing, according to Lauren, was brief, seeking temporary live-in caregiver for 2 children, ages 6 and 9. Remote location. Must be comfortable with solitude. Discreet and quiet preferred. It paid well. Too well. $900 a week. Cash. Katherine had emailed the address listed and received a reply the same evening. The sender used the name Elizabeth T. and claimed her family was renting a property in the mountains outside Sandpoint for the summer. The parents needed to leave on short notice for medical treatment abroad and wanted someone calm, maternal, and self-sufficient to stay with the kids. Katherine fit the bill. She was flattered, maybe even excited. She left on June 12, 2007, driving a silver Honda Civic with just over 90,000 miles on it. She met Lauren for lunch before heading north. Nothing unusual. They hugged in the lot outside an Albertsons. Katherine wore jeans, a cardigan, and a silver locket their mother had left them. She said she'd be back by the 25th. "If they even need me that long," she joked. That evening, at 6:42 p.m., she texted Lauren from a number ending in 2140. "Got here safe. House is remote but beautiful. Kids are quiet. Back soon." It would be the last verified contact. Lauren texted back immediately, No reply. The next morning, she sent 2 more messages. By the 3rd day, she was calling hourly. Voicemail. No response. At first, she assumed Katherine had poor signal, or that the family was strict about device use. But by day 5, the silence had curdled into dread. Lauren drove north on June 17th, tracing the rough directions Katherine had forwarded her in an earlier email. The area was forested, sparsely marked, mostly gravel roads. After nearly 2 hours of navigating switchbacks and dead ends, she found the closest identifiable landmark, a gatepost with peeling white paint and no signage. It led to a long, overgrown path, blocked by a rusted chain. No house, no tire marks, just woods. She drove to the nearest sheriff's station, Bonner County, and filed a missing persons report. The deputy on duty, Harold Dent, noted that Katherine was an adult, had no known mental illness, and could very well be out of contact by choice. He advised Lauren to wait a few more days. That weekend was Father's Day, and resources were stretched thin with traffic incidents and lake patrols. Lauren returned the next day with printed copies of the email exchange, the original job listing, and the GPS pin Katherine had shared. A different officer reviewed the material and agreed it was odd, but no formal search was initiated. There was no evidence of foul play, no abandoned vehicle, no visible structure at the GPS location. Katherine's Civic wouldn't be located until 3 weeks later, discovered deep inside a wooded cul-de-sac nearly 14 miles from where she dropped the pin. The car was locked. Nothing appeared stolen. Inside, investigators found a duffel bag containing folded clothes, a hairbrush, a printed bedtime story, Miss Susie's acorns, and a half-filled notepad. The last entry read, "Ari prefers the red bowl. June won't eat if she sees the sky." There were no fingerprints on the door handles except Katherine's. No one named Thompson, Ari, or June had ever owned property within a 30-mile radius. The land itself, where Katherine's GPS pin dropped, was listed as state-protected forest land. It had never held a registered dwelling. The parcel ID was active, but under the jurisdiction of Idaho's Department of Natural Resources. A building permit had never been filed. The email address that hired Katherine, elizabeth.t@white-hollow.net, went offline days after she vanished. The domain registrar provided no forwarding address. It had been purchased anonymously through a prepaid card in Washington state. The payment trail ended there. By July, investigators had no leads, no suspects, no motive. Just a woman who drove north to watch 2 children, sent 1 message home, and was never seen again. Bonner County Search and Rescue officially entered the case on July 9, 2007, nearly a full month after Katherine Myerson was last heard from. By that time, the only tangible evidence investigators had was her abandoned car, a few pages from a notepad, and the memory of a family her sister had never seen. The location Katherine had texted and the digital pin she'd shared both led to the same area, a sloped hill off a logging road known as Fireweed Pass near a disused ranger station. Aerial maps from 2004 showed no developed structures on the parcel. The road was unpaved, eroded by snowmelt, and inaccessible to most vehicles by late June. But satellite alignment on Katherine's last known GPS pin did suggest a clearing, about the size of a single lot. Deputies accompanied forest rangers on foot to survey the area. They found no house, no foundation, no mailbox, driveway, stonework, propane tanks, or signs of demolition. The only interruption in the ground was a shallow indent, roughly 12 feet across, filled with moss and packed earth. Rangers described it as an old fire ring, or possibly the impression left by a prefab structure, the kind that could be dropped in and removed without permits. No tire tracks, no litter, no indication that anyone had lived there, And yet Katherine had described a very different place. In her final email to Lauren, sent the day before she vanished, she wrote, "Big porch with old swing, 1 story but deep. Kids' rooms are off to the left, mine is near the laundry. Lots of windows. Smells like rosemary." Investigators tried to reconcile that memory with what they found. Silence, pine needles, and a single iron hook hanging from a branch overhead, as if it had once held something heavy. A cadaver dog team was brought in the following week. One dog alerted faintly near the tree line, but the area was too large and too degraded by recent rain to pursue further. No clothing, blood, or buried evidence was found. An incident report filed quietly that August described the location as residential seeming without residential proof. The working theory, according to a redacted internal memo, was that Katherine had been lured to an unknown structure, possibly mobile, by an individual or group posing as a legitimate family. Once there, she was either taken, trafficked, or disappeared voluntarily. The report's final sentence reads, "Possibility. Structure was a temporary site, now removed." The problem was, no one had seen it. No hunters, hikers, or utility workers recalled anything resembling a house in the area. No service calls, no reports of activity. Nothing registered with the county, the state, or tribal lands nearby. Even private satellite companies, contacted during a secondary review in 2008, failed to find any images of the supposed structure. If a house had ever been there, it had left no legal, physical, or digital shadow. The term investigators began using, unofficially, was phantom placement, a phrase reserved for cases where a structure seems to exist in memory, communication, and intention, but never shows up in records or aftermath. The structure Katherine described was detailed, consistent, and plausible. It was not a hallucination. It was a place someone made her believe was real, and she believed it. Enough to drive there, enough to stay. At no point did Katherine ever communicate distress. No emergency call, no attempt to leave, no GPS movement beyond the house. Her phone, recovered from the Civic, showed no outgoing texts, calls, or emails after the one she sent on June 12th. The data log was uncorrupted, but abruptly ended. The phone had died or been shut off at 11:06 p.m. that night. The light usage suggested it had not been tampered with, not wiped, just closed. As the case went cold, Lauren continued searching. She joined parenting forums, childcare boards, and anonymous caregiver message groups, posting Katherine's picture alongside a warning, "If anyone asks you to nanny in the mountains, don't go." No one ever reported a similar ad. No one had heard of White Hollow. No one could verify the family name. But one woman, an au pair from Bend, Oregon, responded privately to Lauren's message months later. She said she'd applied for a job in 2005 that sounded eerily similar. 2 children, summer home, short term, must be quiet and observant. She declined after the parents refused to interview over the phone and insisted on sending a car. She ended the message with just 2 sentences. "I still wonder what would have happened if I'd said yes. The address they gave me, it doesn't exist anymore." In 2011, 4 years after the investigation into Katherine Myerson's disappearance had gone dormant, a line-level case analyst flagged her file during a routine backlog audit. His name was Drew Olney, a civilian contractor working with a nonprofit tasked with cross-referencing unresolved missing persons cases across Western states. He wasn't looking for Katherine specifically. His software had picked up a pattern anomaly, a case tagged as cold/inactive, but lacking its original incident narrative. When Olney pulled the digital file from Bonner County's shared record system, the initial report, usually a time-stamped account of last contact, witness statements, and field notes, was missing. In its place was a blank metadata shell with a timestamp from 2009, 2 years after the original report was filed. The case number was intact, the date was accurate, but the narrative had been replaced with a one-line description: subject adult, voluntary disappearance presumed, pending further info. Olney assumed a clerical error, but when he contacted Bonner County Records to request the original file, the response was curt. "Access locked due to external inquiry." He called the station directly. The deputy who answered didn't know what that meant. After being transferred twice, Olney reached a supervisor who told him the following. The file had been sealed in 2009 due to a jurisdictional overlap with an open inquiry from the Idaho Department of Family Services. When Olney asked what kind of overlap that was, the supervisor paused. "Child care related," he said. "That's all I can say." The moment hung in the air. Katherine had no children, no custody disputes. She wasn't employed by any state-licensed agency. Her role as a nanny had come from a private ad, one that could no longer be traced. Yet her file was sealed under a code usually reserved for high-risk minors, foster placements, or abuse protection orders. Olney, uneasy but intrigued, submitted a formal request for access under the Public Records Act. 3 weeks later, he received a letter from the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare denying the request, citing privacy considerations regarding third-party minors. But there were no third-party minors. Katherine had been alone when she vanished. He tried again, this time through the nonprofit's legal team. The second denial came faster, and this time it included a warning. Continued requests on this case may result in review of organizational access privileges. The nonprofit dropped the inquiry, but Olney didn't. Over the next few months, he reviewed archived web data, scanning now-defunct childcare forums, job listing pages, and regional family blogs. He recovered cached versions of classified ads dating back to 2006. Most were ordinary, but one caught his attention. Posted March 18, 2007, seeking temporary caregiver for 2 young children. Must be comfortable with isolation. Must not require daily communication. Property is elevated, modest, and peaceful. Background not necessary. Loyalty preferred over experience. Respond with age, temperament, and willingness to be unseen. E.T. The contact email, elizabeth.t@white-hollow.net, matched the one used in Katherine's exchange. Olney tried to trace the domain. It had been registered in 2006 through a now-dissolved intermediary service based in Tacoma. Payment was made via prepaid gift card. DNS servers pointed nowhere, no backups, no redirects, just digital ash. He compiled a 22-page memo outlining the inconsistencies. Sealed juvenile records without identified juveniles, a childcare job tied to a deleted domain, and a woman who vanished into a house that no longer existed. He sent the memo to Katherine's family through a quiet channel. Lauren never responded. But someone at the Spokane Police Department did. 2 months later, the memo was cited in a confidential request to reopen the case. It was denied. Officially, the reason given was lack of new evidence. Unofficially, according to a detective who later spoke under condition of anonymity, the request triggered something unusual. An audit flag, the kind typically reserved for internal affairs complaints or federal misrouting. "It lit up red," the detective said, like someone wanted the file to stay buried. From that point forward, no further mention of Katherine Myerson appeared in any state cross-agency report, at least not under her name. The first 911 call came from a landline at 6:03 a.m. on October 17, 2016. James Coleman, 62, reported an unknown woman walking along the perimeter of his property just outside Spokane. He told dispatch she wasn't aggressive, but she looked like she didn't know where she was or who she was with. She appeared clean, unharmed, wearing an old-fashioned dress and no shoes. When he asked if she needed help, she said she was just trying to find the house again. Deputy Lori Adams arrived 17 minutes later. The woman was sitting on a wooden step near the Coleman's tool shed, hands folded, watching the tree line. Adams later wrote that the woman's demeanor was composed, but wrong. Not disoriented, just quiet. Too quiet. When asked for her name, she replied without hesitation, Katherine Myerson. That name had not crossed any law enforcement terminal in years. Adams ran it anyway, and the system pinged red. Katherine had an open missing persons file out of Idaho, last seen June 12, 2007. Adams stepped away to radio it in. When she returned, Katherine was standing, her hands cupped as if still holding something. She asked if the officer had seen a white house nearby. With rosemary in the windows, she said, and the porch swing. She smiled. I just stepped out for a moment. They'll be worried. She was transported without resistance to Providence Sacred Heart Medical Center for evaluation. The ER staff noted several things immediately. Her heart rate was normal. Her cognition was intact. No physical trauma. No drug markers. She carried no ID, no phone, no wallet. Just a folded sheet of paper tucked into the inside seam of her dress, a page torn from a children's book, the edges singed. The attending nurse documented Katherine's first words upon arrival. Can someone check on the children? They don't like being alone when it rains. Within the hour, Spokane PD verified her identity through fingerprint records. The system updated her status from missing to recovered. Her sister Lauren was contacted first. The voice message left was brief and cautious. We've located someone believed to be your sister. She's safe. She's here. The news made it to regional press within 2 days. The headline ran quiet. Woman missing since 2007, found alive in Spokane. Investigation reopened. The article was 4 paragraphs. No photos, no follow-up. What it didn't mention, what wouldn't make it into any official release, was what Katherine said during her first psychiatric evaluation. The hospital psychiatrist, Dr. Kendra Vogel, began the interview with standard reorientation questions: name, date, president, birthday. Katherine answered everything calmly, except the year. She insisted it was still 2007. When Vogel gently corrected her, Katherine blinked twice and said, "No, I just left." She described 2 children, Ari and June, sweet kids, a little pale, whom she had been watching while the parents were away. The parents, she said, had promised to return after a week. "I think they got delayed," she offered. "They left me cash in the drawer." When asked how long she'd been with the children, she grew quiet. After a pause, she said, "Time didn't work right in that house. It didn't pass like it does here." Vogel documented that Katherine showed no signs of acute psychosis. Her thoughts were linear. Her memory was detailed, if oddly fixed. She believed what she was saying. She believed she'd only stepped outside that morning. She believed the children were still waiting for her. And she believed, absolutely, that they hadn't aged. "They never get tired," she said. "They don't need much, just routine. They play. They read. They sit by the window when it storms. But they always look the same. Exactly the same." When shown photos of children from local schools, Katherine grew confused. She asked where the rest of their names were. She couldn't identify Ari or June. "You don't have their faces right," she said. "That's not how they look." The next day, when a social worker tried to clarify whether the children were real, Katherine laughed softly. "Of course they're real," she said. "You think I made them up?" But no Ari or June Thompson had ever been reported missing in 2007. No family by that name had ever registered property in Idaho. No nanny contract, no employer tax record, no legal guardianship document existed. The house, the one with the porch and the rosemary, remained a phantom. When Vogel asked how she found herself in the orchard, Katherine said she was walking to find help. She thought maybe someone could bring her back. She wanted to get home before the children noticed she was gone. "They don't like to be without me," she said. "They get stuck." Katherine's intake at Sacred Heart lasted 4 days before she was transferred to a psychiatric care unit under a 72-hour hold for observation. During that time, she underwent 2 psychiatric interviews, a neurological exam, and a preliminary trauma assessment. She remained cooperative, composed, unshaken by the medical attention, yet unwilling, or perhaps unable, to engage with the reality being presented to her. When asked to recount what had happened after she accepted the nanny job in 2007, her answers were steady, unemotional, at times eerily rehearsed. She said she arrived at the house in the evening. The parents were already packed. They were polite but in a hurry, she said. I remember the mother brushing lint off my shoulder. She smiled and said, "They'll like you." Katherine said the house was quiet. Everything was labeled: dishes, drawers, toy bins. A whiteboard on the fridge listed Ari's bedtime, 8:30 sharp, and June's preferred cereal. There was a wood stove, a laundry room with no door, and a broken clock on the mantel, always stopped at 5:17. The children, she said, were already in pajamas when she arrived. They called me Miss Kate, she said, not Nanny, just Miss Kate. Dr. Vogel asked what the children were like. Katherine leaned forward, thoughtful. Ari didn't like sunlight. He stayed near the pantry and whispered when he talked. June hummed constantly. Little songs she'd make up. They never argued, never changed. They always wore the same thing. Ari in a red sweater, June in a green dress with a star pin. Vogel noted that Katherine described them not as memories, but as routines. She used the present tense, as if they were still upstairs. "They didn't grow?" Vogel asked. "No," Katherine replied. "Not once, not even a little. Ari scraped his knee the second week. I cleaned it and waited for the scab. It never came." Vogel asked if she found that strange. "I did at first," Katherine said. "But the longer I stayed, the less I noticed. The air felt thick in that house, like time got slower if you stayed still. They never needed new shoes, never got taller. They just stayed." Katherine said the parents called once, maybe twice, a voice on the other end of the landline that sounded muffled, distant. She could never remember the number. The mother said they'd be back soon, that I was doing great, that they were grateful. Vogel asked why she didn't leave. Katherine paused. Her expression shifted for the first time, something between hesitation and hurt. "Because they needed me," she said. "The house didn't work right when I wasn't there. The lights flickered. The stove made sounds. The hallway got longer. But when I stayed with them, everything settled, like the house was waiting too." Over the next 2 days, Katherine repeated the same story. Her timeline never changed. Her tone remained gentle, absent of distress. She asked for small things, a hairbrush, a quieter room, a pencil, but never inquired about the year. When Vogel reminded her it was 2016, Katherine blinked and said, "That can't be right. I made breakfast yesterday." Neurological scans showed no trauma, no lesions, no degenerative disease. Her blood work was clean, no substances, no nutritional deficiencies. She was healthy, coherent, and very likely suffering from what Vogel would later describe as chronic cognitive time displacement, paired with possible dissociative regression. In her notes, Vogel wrote, "Patient exhibits classic symptoms of long-term psychological containment. No concept of duration, no self-awareness of missing time. But unlike most cases, her story is unchanging. No gaps, no fabrication. If it's a delusion, it is seamless." Katherine described only one moment that broke routine. She said sometime. She wasn't sure when. She tried to leave. "The front door was open," she said. "I stepped out. It was foggy. I thought maybe I could get to the road and call someone. But when I turned around, the house was gone. Just trees. So I walked until I saw the orchard." She couldn't explain how much time had passed. "Not long," she said. "A day. Maybe a few hours." But her shoes were gone. Her dress was damp. The paper in her pocket, the singed children's book page, had curled at the edges from heat. She didn't remember fire, or light, or fear. Only the sound of someone upstairs humming, and the feeling that she had forgotten something very important. "They'll be waiting," she said again. "I told them I'd come right back." Katherine's case arrived at the Spokane Psychiatric Review Board under the heading "Recovered Adult with Temporal Disorientation." It was a phrase crafted not to provoke scrutiny. But within the hospital walls, her story had begun to circulate. Not just among clinicians, but among social workers, residents, even overnight staff. She was, by every clinical measure, intact. No erratic behavior, no paranoia, no signs of disorganized thought. She ate normally, slept through the night, maintained eye contact. Her answers were consistent across multiple interviews. She remembered her childhood, her schooling, her mother's handwriting, the names of television shows that ended a decade earlier. But every time the question came, "Where have you been?" she returned to the same house, same 2 children, same routine. "She believes it," Dr. Vogel wrote, "but she doesn't argue. She isn't defensive. It's as if nothing outside that narrative matters." Katherine agreed to stay for evaluation. When given access to books, she gravitated toward parenting manuals and children's literature. She asked for her meals to be arranged in 2 servings, one for Ari, one for June, she said. Staff complied at first, then stopped when it became clear she would set one aside, untouched, for hours. A second opinion was ordered. Dr. Leland Nishimura, a forensic psychiatrist with the state, conducted a separate series of interviews over a 2-week period. His conclusion diverged sharply. Where Vogel saw coherence and trauma adaptation, Nishimura saw compartmentalized psychotic delusion. He cited her emotional flatness, ritualistic behavior, and fixed narrative timeline as evidence that she had either fabricated the story over time or had come to believe in an invented reality as a means of coping with long-term isolation. He flagged her case as medium risk for reintegration and recommended transitional housing under psychiatric supervision. Vogel disagreed. She believed Katherine was not psychotic, but conditioned, that her mental state resembled cases of induced compliance, where individuals held in controlled environments for extended periods adopt the behavioral patterns and constructed logic of their captors or surroundings. But there was a problem. There were no captors, no documented trauma, no injuries, no evidence that anyone had held or harmed her. And perhaps most damning of all, there was still no proof the house or the children ever existed. Authorities reran Katherine's digital history. They found her emails, the job posting, even a partial text log from 2007. But beyond that, no witness accounts, no property records, no reports of a family matching the Thompsons' description. FBI analysts briefly reviewed her case under the Human Trafficking Division. They dismissed it within 2 weeks, citing lack of origin network indicators. A regional news affiliate filed a request to interview Katherine, It was denied. A local radio show attempted to trace the childcare domain name used in the job listing. The domain had been re-registered twice under fake credentials and was now offline. Even Katherine's sister, Lauren, began to doubt what had really happened. She remembered me, Lauren later told a private investigator. She asked about my apartment, my ex, the weekend we got matching earrings. But when I said, "Where did you go?" she just smiled and said, "I never left. They're still in the house." By mid-November, the review board was split. One faction argued for supervised release into transitional housing. Another pushed for long-term inpatient care. Both agreed on one thing. There were no grounds to hold her indefinitely. She posed no threat to herself or others. But releasing her meant acknowledging that they couldn't explain her absence, couldn't trace her movements, couldn't disprove a word of what she said. On November 28, 2016, Katherine was transferred to the Briarfield Recovery Center under a voluntary stay agreement. She was not under court order. She was, on paper, free to leave. She didn't. Not once. Each evening, she sat by the window in her room, watching the hill, waiting. When one of the night nurses asked what she was looking for, she answered softly, "They said they'd wave when it was time to come home." The renewed investigation into Katherine Myerson's disappearance didn't start with law enforcement. It started with a memo. In early 2017, a retired private investigator named Henry Kalk turned over a personal archive of cold case files to a small group of researchers affiliated with a digital forensics nonprofit in Missoula. Among the boxes, Katherine's intake notes, printed forum screenshots, and 2 hand-drawn maps. Kalk had been hired by Lauren Myerson in 2007, shortly after Bonner County suspended its active search. He had spent 3 months tracing the digital footprint of the job posting, the IP, the domain, the child care forum moderator logs, before reaching the same dead end: prepaid hosting, a deleted email address, no recovery path. But what caught the researchers' attention wasn't the digital trail, it was the sketch. On yellow graph paper, Kalk had drawn what Katherine reportedly described to her sister the day before she vanished. A long 1-story house, porch on the south side, laundry room to the east, children's bedrooms off a narrow hallway. Smelled like rosemary, she'd said. Windows in every room. The layout wasn't remarkable, but one detail stood out: a back stairwell that led to a root cellar. She said it was always cold, Kalk had noted in the margin, even in summer. The researchers cross-referenced the sketch against a database of historical buildings, using roof lines and porch orientation as filters. After 2 weeks, they found a match. It was a church-owned residence decommissioned in 1999 and razed 2 years later due to structural rot. Located on private land once leased to a now-defunct spiritual commune known as the White Hollow Collective, the house had occupied a small rise northeast of Fireweed Pass, less than 3 miles from the spot where Katherine had dropped her GPS pin. On paper, the house no longer existed, but its floor plan matched Katherine's description nearly exactly, right down to the cellar. The group compiled their findings into a report and quietly submitted it to the Spokane Police Department. At first, the response was measured. SPD confirmed receipt but offered no commitment. Then, unexpectedly, the file was flagged for review under a joint task force program handling unresolved cross-jurisdictional disappearances. Within 2 weeks, a detective was assigned. Her name was Marla Downs. She had joined SPD after 15 years in tribal investigations. She requested the full file from Bonner County, including all incident notes from 2007. What she received disturbed her. The original case documents were missing. The backup database showed a series of deletions clustered between June and August 2009, all tied to user credentials that had since been retired. No logs, no download records, no signatures. Just blank entries where narrative reports should have been. Downs contacted the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, asking if Katherine had ever appeared in any reports related to minor welfare, custody arrangements, or child endangerment. They declined to answer. She filed a formal request for access, citing the open status of Katherine's case. The reply came in the form of a single redacted memo dated October 2007. Subject may have been present at unregulated residence operating outside licensure guidelines. Identity of minors involved unverifiable. Case closed under insufficient corroboration. No names, no witness statements, no forensic review. The memo ended with a handwritten note: "Do not escalate. Passive containment recommended." Downs requested a site visit. On March 5, 2017, accompanied by a ranger, a county liaison, and a cadaver dog team, she hiked into the tree-covered rise where the White Hollow residence once stood. The ground was uneven. Wild moss had overtaken most of the clearing, but a partial concrete slab remained. Flat, cracked, ringed with rusted nails. A broken hook embedded in the soil near what would have been the cellar entrance. The dogs showed interest at 2 points, one at the corner of the slab and another along a slope beneath an old birch tree. No remains were recovered. The soil was too acidic, the degradation too advanced. But beneath the slab, embedded in the earth, the team recovered something else. A child's shoe sole, split, faded, with a fragment of thread still attached. Size unknown. It was bagged and sent to the state lab. Katherine was not told about the discovery. But 3 nights later, she began humming in her sleep, a tune staff didn't recognize. When a nurse asked what it was, she answered without looking up. "That's June's song. She hums when it rains." The property Katherine had described for nearly a decade, a remote home nestled off Fireweed Pass, with windows in every room and a root cellar that never warmed, had officially never existed. The White Hollow residence had been privately leased to a religious offshoot from 1991 to 1999, its structure unregistered, its occupancy informal. When the group dissolved, the land reverted back to the state, and the home was bulldozed quietly by the final tenant, a man listed only by initials in paperwork. RJ. No permits were filed for demolition. No photographs of the house survive. The land transfer document, reviewed by Detective Marla Downs in 2017, lists the structure as non-essential outbuilding. No blueprints, no inspections. Just a checkbox under unimproved. The remaining concrete slab, partially buried under moss and pine debris, was photographed, cordoned off, and surveyed for soil disruption. Beneath it, excavation revealed 2 items: the partial child's shoe sole recovered earlier, and a rusted tin box. Inside the box were 3 items: a faded photograph of 2 children standing in front of a curtained window, a clipped page from a parenting magazine dated 1994 on how to instill good habits in sensitive children, a plastic-coated name tag reading "Miss Kate," handwritten in red ink. The photo had no date stamp, no writing on the back, and was water-damaged along the edges. One child wore a red sweater, the other a pale green dress. Their faces were obscured by glare. It was submitted for analysis. Facial recognition failed. No match found in any missing persons database. The image was entered into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children archive and quietly filed under ambiguous historical recovery. When Downs attempted to revisit the site 2 weeks later, she found the access road gated and the Forest Service contact assigned to her visit reassigned. The explanation was mundane: seasonal road closure due to erosion risk. But when she requested an override, she was told the closure was indefinite and would require authorization from the state. That authorization never came. Downs turned back to the paper trail. The White Hollow Collective, the group that had once occupied the land, had been investigated only once, in 1998, for non-compliance with state education standards. The complaint had alleged that children were being homeschooled off-site with no oversight, but the investigation ended abruptly after a site visit reported no signs of occupancy. The investigator who filed that report, a woman named Sharon Keyes, died in 2001 in what was ruled an accidental fall. Her case file included a handwritten note from her final week. Children seen but not confirmed. Kept out of reach. Too quiet. Not natural. The note was never filed as part of the official record. It remained paper-clipped to the back of the report, unseen for 16 years. When presented with a scanned copy of the photo recovered from the tin box, Katherine stared at it for nearly a minute before responding. "That was the back window," she said. "They like to watch storms from there." Asked to confirm if the children in the photo were Ari and June, she smiled faintly and said, "It's too blurry. But yes, I think so." Forensic review of the tin box found no usable fingerprints. The items inside were too degraded for DNA extraction. The shoe sole, the only item with partial material integrity, was tested against Katherine's DNA. No match. But one fiber sample retrieved from the shoe, dyed cotton, low twist, non-synthetic, was found to be consistent with textile samples manufactured between 1995 and 2001 by a now-defunct children's clothing company based in Oregon. The brand name, Thistlethread. The company went out of business in 2002. A fire destroyed the majority of its inventory and production records. The lead went nowhere. Downs submitted her report. The case remained open, but with no further actionable steps. Katherine, when told of the shoe, only said, "Ari always lost things, but I told him not to leave his shoes near the stove." No one had mentioned a stove. The final interview was not conducted by police or by a psychiatrist, but by a reporter, an independent documentarian named Esther Whittle, who had been quietly following Katherine's case since 2016. She'd written a short exposé on the erased childcare listings connected to rural vanishings. She'd also managed to obtain internal memos from the Department of Health and Welfare, redacted, but damning. One of them included a phrase she couldn't forget. Subject believes containment was voluntary. Continue narrative reinforcement until cognitive elasticity fails. Whittle reached out to Katherine's care team in late 2018. Her request was denied. But months later, Katherine herself asked to speak with someone outside the system. When asked why, she said, "I want to explain it right this time." The interview took place in a quiet office at Briarfield. No camera, just audio. Katherine agreed to everything. No script, no lawyer, no guidance. Whittle opened gently. "Do you remember where you were?" Katherine nodded. "The house with the 2 staircases. The one where time didn't matter unless you noticed it." "Did you ever try to leave?" "Once, but I forgot why." "What about the children?" Katherine smiled. "They liked routine. They didn't get older. I made sure of that. I think that's what the house needed. Someone to believe in stillness." Whittle paused, then asked what she'd been waiting for. What the whole story seemed to orbit around. Were they real? Katherine looked out the window. They were quiet. They listened. They watched the sky. When I woke up every morning, they were exactly where I'd left them. Did they speak? Only when I forgot myself. Whittle asked what that meant. Katherine didn't answer. She closed her eyes and began humming, low and slow, a lullaby with no words. The interview lasted 28 minutes. At the end, Whittle asked one final question. "Do you remember the moment you left?" Katherine nodded. I stepped outside. The wind was different, lighter. I waited for the door to close behind me, but it didn't. Why not? They weren't ready. In 2020, the Barefoot Recovery Center was quietly shut down during a statewide consolidation of mental health services. Katherine was relocated to a smaller transitional facility, and then, 6 months later, discharged to a monitored apartment unit in Spokane's South Hill district. She received visits from a community care coordinator, took part in light volunteer work, and remained on low-dose medication. But by 2021, she'd stopped speaking. Staff recorded long silences, followed by repetitive motion, standing near windows, arranging chairs in twos, requesting pairs of utensils for single meals. She often asked for second portions in case the children come. One night during a winter storm, a night nurse found her standing at the back door, coat on, shoes off, staring into the falling snow. "They're nearby," she whispered. "I think they moved the house again." A month later, she was gone. No signs of forced entry. Her coat was missing. Her file, her possessions, her medications, all left behind. A single note was found on her pillow, written in a slow, curved hand. "They're still waiting. I can't let them forget." She was never seen again. Search efforts resumed in the area near Fireweed Pass. The old trail leading to the razed White Hollow house was surveyed with drones, dogs, and ground radar. Nothing was found. Except this. Near the same birch tree where the tin box had been unearthed, investigators found a child's crayon drawing, weighted beneath a stone. It showed a tall figure with long brown hair, standing between two smaller ones. In the background, a window, and what looked like a swinging porch. At the bottom, written in large red block letters, Miss Kate. She was never formally declared deceased. No remains were found. No digital activity. No sightings. Just one more absence layered over the last. Katherine Myerson walked into a house no one else could find, lived with children no one else remembered, and disappeared again, this time leaving only paper, silence, and a name they never stopped calling her. She said they never aged. She said they waited. The file remains open. Did she stay to protect them, or to forget what she saw?